Hey, this is Ray's Radio, and today I've brought on my amazing friend and nutritionist, Laurel Garner, and she's a
Hi.
holistic nutritionist in Penticton.
Thanks for having me on, Raina. I'm super excited.
I'm so happy to talk to you. You know, I love talking to you. And we're going to
Yeah,
try to
me
talk
too.
about diet culture in half an hour.
There's a lot of things that we're not going to be able to talk
It's true. It's true. We want to give people just a little bite size. We want to have at least two nuggets, like tools for you guys to take away today about mindful eating and decoding cravings. Those are really important for us to talk about. And we also want to talk about the 80-20 rule. So um, why don't, first of all, tell us a little bit about your practice and sort of, how you came into nutrition work. And then well, let's talk about what the 80-20 rule is for you.
about. Okay. Yeah. So I'm Laurel. I'm a mom of two boys who are 8 and 6, and they keep me running, right? It's like they keep me busy. And definitely they're at the forefront of my mind when I'm thinking about nutrition and choices that we have in our house, for myself and for them, for our family. Um, I've been doing nutrition since I was pregnant with my first and been practicing in Penticton, and have worked a lot generally with women. That's the population that I tend to see. I think most nutritionists, Raina's nodding, we see a lot of women, and what comes up again and again is weight loss, diet. How many calories should I be eating? Tell me what foods to eat. And yeah, it's the same thing over and over again. Women that are unhappy with their bodies that want to be told what to eat. And usually they want to be told amounts, like specific amounts,
Mhm.
which is hard to do. It doesn't fit within the mold of intuitive eating and listening to our own bodies. I can't tell another person what to eat because I'm not them.
Isn't that amazing though? Because if you tell someone like, I'm a nutritionist, but I'm not going to tell you what to eat, they're like, huh?
Yeah,
What do you
definitely.
mean you're not going to tell me what to eat? It's like, well, I'm
Yeah,
not you.
I get that. And I usually try and start a lot of the appointments by saying that. Just so
Yeah.
you know, I'm not going to tell you what to eat. I start almost all of my workshops like that because people
Yeah.
expect that they're there to be told what to eat, and that's just not the
Hmm.
case. But I
Hmm.
also explain why I'm not going to tell you. Well, I don't know what your activity level is. I don't know how
That's
food
right.
feels in your body. That's the
Yeah.
basis of it, is I don't know how you feel when you eat an orange. Does it feel
Hmm.
fantastic or does it feel horrible?
Yeah.
Only you know that.
Yeah. And then there's like seasonal and genetics and our ancestry. And like, there's so many variables, right? It's pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how does the 80-20 rule fit in with your practice then?
So the 80-20 rule is something I talk about with all my clients, especially if they're coming for weight loss, and at all my workshops. For me, it's about balance. It's about having um, something to kind of give you a bit of a guide, but to not be in a place of restriction,
Hmm.
deprivation, and then binging, because that's the
Hmm.
cycle that we often get into, is the binging, depriving ourselves, and then we binge because we feel like we've been deprived. So the
Right.
80-20 is simply 80% that's going to fuel your body and fuel your goals. And 20% of the food is food for your soul. And so
Love
that
it.
food is like food that's going to fill your heart, fill your soul. It's going to feel good because you enjoy it. And that's the
Hmm.
biggest thing
Hmm.
that I find people struggle with that 20%, is to do it without guilt. So you
Yeah,
want the
without
chocolate cake?
shame. Yeah.
Yes. You want the chocolate cake? Have the chocolate cake. And don't feel guilty. Love every bite of it and
Right.
really, really enjoy it.
Yeah, and the thing that people forget or don't realize is that when you eat things that slowly, you don't overeat them because you're really conscious and aware. And so you're not going to, when we put that restriction of like, oh, I can only have a tiny slice of cake, it's like, well, if you really enjoy it and slow down and like enjoy every bite, it's not like you're going to eat the whole thing. You're going to have a good sized piece and be like, wow, that was fantastic. And I'm done now.
And
Right.
sometimes, some days, you might eat 2 slices and then you might feel rubbish afterwards. But that's all part of
You
the
learn.
cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah, you learn
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
may do it again. And I find that 80-20 for everyone is different. Sometimes it's
Right.
80-20 in a day.
Right.
Sometimes it's 80-20 in a week, but it's a
Yeah.
loose guideline to say, make sure you have those things on a regular basis, those foods that are fueling your soul that you feel passionate about it. Hopefully some of the 80% you feel passionate about as well.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure you've seen people in your practice like I have where um sort of go the other way and become really obsessive with eating so well. And that's not healthy either because then the unhealthy obsession of diet culture just trickles into what's supposed to be healthy and feeling good. And then it takes all joy out of it. And when things are like so like structured and mechanical and like needing to look a certain way, like that's not that's not a nice way to live. Like that's just as, restrictive and hard on your psyche and your mentality and stressful.
And
And so when we're
stressful for
stressed, we're not going
sure.
to be able to heal and get healthy either.
Yeah. I think you touched on something so important there that it's the restrictiveness. And I know we talked before, just when we were chatting about doing this, um, about what it feels like to be in diet culture. Like, how do you know? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that what you said just there, like that it feels restrictive. It feels
Mm-hmm.
like there's these guidelines that I have to follow. And if I don't follow them, I'm going to be in shame.
I
I'm going to feel
failed. Yeah,
guilty. I
yeah.
failed is a huge thing. Um, and I think that people often, especially the people, sometimes people that are in those kind of like, oh, I'm eating this strict healthy way and only eating quinoa and broccoli
Mm-hmm.
every single
Mm-hmm.
day. That's an extreme example, but
Mm-hmm.
um, that too is buying into something that's not necessarily intuitive
Right.
and following our own needs that could change.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think like when I think about, late high school, early 20s, like that right before nutrition school, that's when I was really into that whole scene. And part of it was the people that I was around, like they were really into dieting as well. And the funny thing about it is that we weren't actually into healthy living, but we were into dieting. And so there was a lot of like, I found this new one, let's do it together. So it almost felt like there was like sort of that community aspect. Like it almost felt fun. Like, well,
Hmm.
everyone else is doing it. It's a challenge we're doing together, but they weren't healthy. They were really restrictive. And I just remember feeling like, you know, you're always depriving yourself. But then there's like a piece of you that's like,
Hmm.
that's successful. And so you're supposed to feel good about it, but it doesn't feel good. But you don't really quite have the language to understand like how to talk about that with someone because it's so normalized, right? And so I always remember kind of feeling that like shame while you're on it because it doesn't feel good. And then when you fail and you're off of it, then shame that you failed it. And there was just like a lot of discomfort basically and guilt, shame, and discomfort around eating as a whole. It was like it felt like everything that was put in my mouth was either, healthy or not. It made me feel like I was doing something wrong. And that's like the worst feeling ever. Like there's no
Especially when
there's no
it's
self-empowerment there.
no, especially when it's something that we need to do to sustain ourselves. And then
Yeah.
every time we're doing that, we're feeling this guilt and this battle with, oh, is this the food I should be eating? Or
Yeah.
this is bad food for me? Um, I think you touched on something that I haven't necessarily thought so much about is that group mentality of dieting.
Hmm.
And that sometimes that's maybe just what we're seeking when we
Right.
jump on
Yeah.
these like challenge trains or like, you know, 30 days of, I don't
Yeah, the
know,
30-day ones. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
30 days of
We know
something.
all of them. Yeah.
30 days of something. I didn't want to put a
Yeah.
box there. Um, and maybe it's just the needing to belong,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Because we know that we're socially starved and we're starved for connection.
Hmm.
And and we're starved for food that's actually fueling our bodies in a way that's
Yeah.
productive. And so
Yeah, the
it's a way
starve
to
word is
try.
metaphorical and physical.
Yes, it is. It's very, very both for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
And that maybe that's part of it.
Hmm.
Because I feel like I resonate with you saying like those, feeling like you're part of something when you did
Hmm.
this certain diet or this certain challenge. You felt like you were part of something.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people do those. They eliminate something. So they're going clean eating. They've eliminated sugar. They've eliminated coffee. And they may feel fantastic for a period of time.
Yeah.
But the, the outcome, in my opinion, from my own personal experience and what I've seen other people, clients, friends, community nutritionists, is there's a backlash. At some point,
For
there's going to be a
sure.
backlash when you've said absolutely no sugar, absolutely no caffeine. To do those absolute, those extremes
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
is what results in a rebound. I think it's
Yeah.
inevitable.
Yeah. Yeah. That inner teen's gonna win, and then you're gonna just rebel.
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. It is. I think we
Yeah.
all have that rebellion in us
Yeah.
that we just
Yeah.
want to, it's like, oh, and I can't have this. So it's the forbidden. And
Right.
then we want it
Mm-hmm.
that much more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We love our forbidden fruits.
I just had a conversation with someone when I was at the gym the other day, and she said she's, taking out sugar. And I try not to, I'm not judging, that's what you're doing. You're taking out sugar for 30 days. Cool.
Yeah.
And she said, oh, I can't have my chai latte anymore. And I said,
Um,
do you know, don't just take it away because that leaves you in a state of deprivation. Take it out and replace it with something else beautiful
Yeah.
that you enjoy. It's going to be different. It may take a while to get used to, but let's try and replace that with something rather than just taking out. I think a lot of the diet culture is like, we're removing this, we're taking something away. Well, what have we given you back?
Yeah.
Let's put something back in.
That's so great, Laurel, because just the other day I was chatting with someone about how I was like years and years ago when I used to like fall in with the whole New Year's resolution sort of scene, it was always about removing things or, you know, you have to deprive yourself of this because that thing that you do makes you a bad person. And I'm very, very grateful that I've done so much work in the last years that I'm at a place now where I actually just want to deepen the things I'm already doing. I don't have to remove anything, which I'm very proud of. But I think it's so amazing to be able to say to someone, what about adding instead of taking away? Because that adding is going to give someone something that their body's going to go, oh, this is something different. And if it's something like nutritious but still tasty, which you and I both know that you can do, it's like it's filling the void still, and it's going to be nourishing, right? So that's really powerful. And I also just like the idea of, intentions over resolutions being about adding more good rather than restricting more, because we already have so much restriction in our life. Why would we impose it in the middle of January just because the calendar changed over, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I see so many people, it falls into diet culture, but also like the restriction and reset of January, like let's eat salads all month.
Oh
And
my
I'm like,
God, right?
it's cold.
No,
We're in winter. Are you
those
going to go to
salad.
Hawaii and do salads?
Yeah, right,
Okay,
right.
fine. Go eat salads in Hawaii. If you're in Canada, don't eat salads in January. Your body's just not going to be happy.
Totally. No,
Yeah.
totally. And that's another, layer of it that comes in is like the seasonal part too. Like a lot of people haven't even heard of seasonal eating. So they're like, wow, what does that mean? And I'm like, oh my goodness. So let's get into this. December, yeah, raspberries in December is not natural. It's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool, but it's not natural. Um, so the other thing that we wanted to get into a little bit was, and I think this really ties in super well with talking about New Year's, is like the labeling of our diets and demonizing certain foods. And I know that's like such a problem. Especially like you and I went through it too. Like when you study nutrition, you have to go through that phase of being like, sugar is evil, this is evil. And you just like, I'm never touching that again. Right. And so you kind of have that phase of like, um, seeking perfection in your diet. And then it takes it a while to kind of undo some of that. So, what would you say if you were coaching someone who's like, labeling good or bad and very like stuck in that black and white thinking?
Yeah, that's a tough one to break because I feel like a lot of those labels they're deep rooted. They're
Mm-hmm,
labels that
mm-hmm.
have probably come from when we were children. They're things that we've heard our whole life, even maybe not, it may have been in the family home or it might have just been in a social circle, and definitely in media, like the
Hmm.
grocery stores, commercials are set up in a way that certain foods are viewed as good, certain
Yeah.
foods are viewed as bad. And the good foods are going to help you be healthy and thin or lose weight. And the bad foods are good. You're going to be fat and gluttonous
Right.
and all that negative, those negative connotations.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's about, I probably would give them the tool of mindful eating,
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
they are, you eat that food and how do you feel? How do you feel when you eat that food? Not about what Joe or Fred says is good or bad.
Yeah.
How do you?
Yeah.
And maybe just throwing the columns, like writing it all out. I know we did this in a previous workshop. We actually burned those columns of good and bad food.
Oh my God,
And
that was so fun.
and that to me was such a good, like, let's just burn it. Let's get rid of
Yeah.
it. So whether you burn it, crumple it up, you throw it away, is for some people, it might need to be a physical thing where you're like, okay, I'm scratching out all these columns. Maybe
Hmm.
list those foods. And I think that's a practice for someone to realize how often we're categorizing. Because I think
Yeah.
people do it, and I still catch myself, you
Totally.
know, categorizing the food. And it's about getting rid of those labels and maybe writing down what foods do I think are good foods and what foods do I think are bad. And then finding some area that you can say, well, the chocolate cake, it tastes really delicious. So that must be kind of good. It was made with love because my best friend made it or whatever. It
Yeah.
has some cocoa in it, which has got some minerals. So finding some and knowing that those
Yeah.
foods, even the, jubes that are just sugar and color, well, they taste really good. That's
Yeah.
my weakness. And so finding some good in those bad and
Yeah.
just being mindful
Yeah.
and trying to get rid of, like, this is what I struggle with, is what do you label food if it's not, like, how do you talk about food? I think that's where people get lost. How do you talk about food if it's not good, bad, healthy, unhealthy?
Hmm. Hmm.
I think that's where people get stuck.
Yeah,
And that's where
totally.
I catch myself too. Even though I know conceptually this food isn't good or bad, it's like we have lack of language for
Yeah.
talking about food.
Yeah, true, true.
It just has to be food. It's just food.
It's just food. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and I was going to explain to everyone. So the diet culture burn was an event that me and Laurel did over Zoom like this, and we had a bunch of women show up, and we did like diet culture perceptions, and just like Laurel said, like the foods, the columns, um, and then we wrote it all down on this like huge poster board that me and Laurel had behind us. And then we burned it and like physically burned it with flames in it. So it was almost like ceremonial. It was very powerful. And the women who came really enjoyed it. And I just think that was such a cool event because it was really like, sort of putting a stake in the ground for those women to be like, I'm taking this seriously now to start
Mm.
working on my mindset around how I'm viewing food and how I'm talking about food. And because it's like it's all our perceptions and like how we've been sort of talking about like that black and white thinking, like it's just a perception, but when we heal that, we don't have that like battle in our head anymore. It's like it just is, and that's something that I work with people when I'm helping them with cravings, and we can get into that after, is like explaining to them, like, I want you to be at a point where there can be a tub of ice cream in the freezer or bags of chips on the fridge, and you're like, yeah, okay, I can take it or leave it. Like, that's what I want for you, because most people feel that that food has control over them. And they're like, I have to either eat it all so it's gone, get it out of my sight, right? Out of sight, out of mind, or they're just like, oh, I can't buy it because then I'll eat it. And I'm like, but you don't have to eat it, right? So we want to get to that point where it's just we're so neutral about it. It's like ice cream exists, potato chips exist, but they don't have any control over you, like whatsoever. So uh Yeah, I'm sure that you help people with cravings a lot too. Like that's really problematic for people. And I think that's kind of one of their initial resistances when you get into talking about mindful eating is they're like, I'll do it, but like, what about the things I crave? Like, how can
Hmm.
I, because there's emotional attachment there too, right?
Oh, for sure. For sure. It's emotional. It's physical. I think there's a big physical. I just want to backpedal a little bit because you said
Hmm.
something that really, really resonated with me about being able to have things in the house without having to eat them. Now,
Hmm.
this is something that I can relate to so much, and maybe to give people hope that it is possible. Because I came from a place where when I met my husband 15 years ago, we could not have chips in the house. We could not have
Mm,
candy in the house. We could not have juice and like ice cream, any of
okay,
those things,
yeah,
because I would eat it. And I felt like that exactly like you described. I have to get rid of it. I have to resist it. It's bad. I can't
yeah,
have that. And now, 2 kids later, lots of work, I'm able to have those foods in my house. Do I choose to have them there all the time? Eh, there's always chips in the house. Always. My husband loves chips. There's always chips in the house. I'm good with that one. But I am at a place, it is possible to get to a place where those things are there
yeah,
and I don't have to eat them all the time
yeah.
because I look at it and I'm like, nah. And sometimes I do. Sometimes I
Right.
do. So I'm like, oh, this is really good
Yeah.
and I'm mindful about it.
80/20.
And yeah, totally, totally. But just to give people hope, because I think that if you said
Hmm.
to me 20 years ago that you will be okay with having these foods in your house at some point, I wouldn't have believed you
Yeah. Yeah.
because it was so ingrained in me that that wasn't okay.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the nice thing about like both of our stories is like when like sort of people have this perception, this idea in their head of what nutritionists are supposed to be. And both of us have stories where it's like, I didn't
Hmm.
this is not, I evolved into this, you know what I mean? Like, and it was a lot of work. And so it's nice to be able to share those things because then um it's like I'm not on a pedestal because I'm a nutritionist, right? Like we still have
Yeah,
our lives and our
exactly.
choices. And it can help people to understand that we dealt with the same stuff too. But that's why we're teaching it because we've dealt with it, we've healed it, and we want to share how people can get to a place too where it's not taking over their lives. Yeah. Okay.
Well, and
Oh, go ahead.
oh, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, I think that it's the reality of like, people come into my house and they may see the chocolate and the candies and the chips. And it's like, just because I'm a nutritionist doesn't mean that I have it perfect, because
Hmm.
there is no perfect, and that I have it figured out, like, yes, I've done a lot of work, but there's still days where I'm like, okay, this is a challenge. Let's work through this. And I have
Hmm.
the tools to do that. And that's what we want to offer people.
Hmm. When we first met, did I ever take you out for a chocolate brownie?
I don't think you did. I
Okay.
don't.
When I met my mentor, she took me out for a chocolate brownie, and I was like, "But what do you mean?" Because I was like fresh out of nutrition school. So you're still
Yeah.
eating really
Yeah.
perfectly and everything's perfect. And she was just like, "What do you mean? We're eating brownies." And I'm like, "Oh my God." But it was so perfect. And it was so smart for her to do that because then it set me on that more balanced path, right? It's like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, just because we're nutritionists doesn't mean that we're eating broccoli all day.
Yeah.
Let's go back a little bit into decoding cravings because I know you work
Yeah.
on that with people, and you probably do a little bit more on the physical with people, whereas when I'm helping people with cravings, it's usually a little bit more on the emotional trauma side. So I'm really curious about like fats, carbs, right? Like more the physical side that people are going to be their bodies are asking for through the cravings.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I give the example often because it makes people laugh, and I think it's very something people can resonate with is a pregnant woman craving pickles and ice cream.
Hmm.
That is actually a very, pregnant or not, pickles and ice cream is actually a very simple craving to decode. Pickles are salt. A
Yeah.
woman in pregnancy is going to be craving a lot more salt, a lot more minerals. And a good quality salt is going to have more minerals than just a pickle. So you're going to get even more if you get a good quality salt. And the ice cream is fat. If you think of how much that woman, pregnant woman, is working and building in her body, she's going to need a lot more fats. Now you translate that to the average person, not pregnant, a man or a woman who's having some cravings of chips, right? Chips yeah, there's the crunch factor. There's the habit of this is what you do when you watch TV. But there's a physical craving there that could be for some carbs. So
Hmm.
you could have been depriving yourself of carbs if you're doing some diet that has a limited carb amount in it.
Right.
Or
Mhm.
maybe you haven't got enough of the good carbs in your day. So some good seeds and grains, some vegetables, um, maybe you just haven't got those good carbs in your day. Or it could be the salt. It could be,
Mhm.
often salt is something that people can restrict, and sometimes do kind of fear salt. And some people do have to restrict it, but most people don't need to restrict quality salts.
Yeah.
So potato chips, not necessarily quality salt, it's salt,
Yeah.
but put some good Himalayan salt on some celery or cucumber. Maybe that's gonna meet you halfway. It's got some
Mhm.
crunch, it's got
Mhm.
some salts, it's got some good minerals in there. Um, and so yeah, there can be that chemical need that your body's asking for.
Yeah.
Um, Ice cream is the good fat. So going for some avocado, maybe like a chocolate avocado pudding if you need something sweet, if you're
Mm.
going for that sweet factor too. Um, so there is a way if you can kind of break it down to what is this craving. Chocolate. Sometimes you're craving chocolate because you need some magnesium.
That's
Maybe it's a
right.
serotonin hit. That's the other part of like carbs is the serotonin
Hmm.
hit that you get from having a
Yes.
carb. And people
Oh,
wonder
I always
why they're
forget
like,
about that. Yes.
yeah, they feel so good after they have
Mhm.
that like piece of cake or that donut. And it's like, well, yeah, you just got to hit a serotonin. So how can we
Yeah.
recreate again, not just taking it away? How can we recreate that serotonin hit?
Yeah.
Looking at pictures of loved ones, talking to a
Yeah.
friend. These are also things that give you a
Exercise. It's
yeah,
so good. Yeah.
totally, totally.
Yeah.
And so, I think that takes away a bit of the guilt and the shame
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
like, oh, I just have no willpower. That's something I hear so
Right.
much.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, no, is there something actually chemical going on here
Yeah.
that is nothing to do with your willpower? It's actually like a chemical thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm curious to hear about the spiritual part, the
Well,
trauma part.
there's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, we all have
Yeah.
like childhood food stuff, right? Like,
Mhm.
every person I've worked with, has that. And there's like some pretty like Freudian stuff with food, like there's some like mother wound stuff with dairy and like there's some pretty fascinating deep ones where when you open it for people, they're like, I don't know if I'm ready to look at that one.
Mhm.
And I'm like,
Mhm.
yeah, this is uncomfortable work. But it's like there's layers and layers and layers, right? So sometimes, like you just explained, two good examples of the physical ones. It's like there might be, um, the physical people can work on that physical part, and they're making other changes in other parts of their lives, and then feeling like, they have the capacity um, to sort of work with the deeper traumas, but um I guess I would say the one that I have seen on repeat, is comments that were made by family members,
Mhm.
moms or aunts or dads, commenting on the body of the person
Mhm.
eating or how much they're eating. And it was like that family member was just making a comment, but it became such a identity piece for that person
Yeah.
that they carried their whole life. Um, and there's so many things that can happen as a child that can play out in people's food later. I've also worked with people who like had a lot of siblings, and so they were having to like physically guard their plate. So then, but then as a full grown human, they're still doing it. So their digestion's terrible because they're like physically hunched over and eating really fast. Because if you don't eat fast, your brothers steal your food. Really fascinating stuff like that. So same
Yeah.
as decoding the physical cravings, it's like finding out, where did this start? Like, where did this come from? And then what part of us did that hurt that we can start to heal? It's really fascinating.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I want to be able to leave people with our two nuggets. So why don't we sort of, why don't we break down how people can start a mindful eating practice. I know that you've done a lot of talks on that, and we used to even talk about that when we did our healing anxiety workshops
For
too. We used to
sure,
talk
for
about
sure.
mindful eating. So, why don't you just break that down a little bit for people who are used to dieting but are trying to get away from it and trying to just like be healthy and work towards being healed rather than needing to be a certain number. And so, how can they start a mindful eating practice, not as a diet, but as like a lifestyle practice?
I think what you touched on is it's a lifestyle practice. So it's something that you adopt that you're going to do most of the time that just becomes natural habit. And so even if it starts as simply as taking one breath before you eat,
Mm-hmm.
all it takes, and then you can take it to the next level, looking at the plate of food. What colors do you see? I use the example of often our brains want to do something in dieting. We're looking for something to do. We're looking for a number to count or, calories to count, size, portions. Well, let your mind, your brain do the job of how many colors do I see? How many
Mm-hmm.
textures do I see? How many different textures do I taste?
Yeah.
And that's the next step, right? And so just starting with that simple breath, trying to slow down is, just simply we all eat way too fast.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And taking one breath before we eat can really start you thinking more with more awareness about the food that you're consuming.
Absolutely. That's really all it takes to start, isn't it? And something I've been teaching people, like, I don't know if you know this, I've been learning a lot more about like vagus nerve stimulation and our nervous system in the last few years anyway. And one of the tools that I just learned, which I've been teaching my clients now, I'm like, just do this before a meal. It's like, it's one tiny extra step and it'll make a huge difference. So you just put your hands on your cheekbones like this and you just rub up and down. And it's like within like 20 seconds max, something's going to happen. You're either going to have like a muscle release or a yawn or like a smile or something that's like, and it's a reset for your nervous system. And it's so easy. You're just rubbing your face. If you do that at the dinner table, no one's going to be uncomfortable, right? Like it's super easy tool. And then your nervous system's like, whoa. So that, what you said, taking breaths partnered with something like that, or even just like thinking about the bottoms of your feet, like ground yourself and get your nervous system calm to be like, I'm present now and I'm eating. Something that Chef Scott said once was, eat your food, not your phone. So I know you and I have talked
use
about
it
this
all the
too,
time.
but yeah, you got to
All the
put the
time.
phone down, man.
The phone down, close the computer,
Yeah.
just take and really like people are like, I don't have time. I don't have time. Well, do you have time to be ill? Do you have time for disease? Do you have time to be sick?
Just about
Live.
prioritizing.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For sure.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so yeah, so slowing down. And I really liked how you sort of reframed that. It's like your mind's going to be busy anyway. So why not give it, like it's still working, but give it a different job. Like look at all these things, brain, instead of looking at these ones. It's like texture, colors, flavors, sensations, like even memories, right? Like people can
Yeah.
be aware of what's coming up for them when they're eating this food. And you don't have to do anything about it. It's just about observing that, right? So that can kind of take some of the pressure off too.
For
Now,
sure.
do you try to get people to do mindful eating with every meal or just kind of set them easier goals like once a day? Because it does take
Honestly,
a while to like
yeah,
settle into that practice.
I think if people can do it even 3 times a week to start, because it can feel
Totally.
like a lot. So
Yeah.
starting with something that you're going to be successful. If you feel like you can be successful with once a week, do once a week. If you're
Hmm.
like, no, I feel like I can do this, then do one meal a day. But
Yeah.
don't set yourself up for failure. Don't,
Totally.
set your standards high, say I'm going to do this every meal, every day for the rest of my life. No, it's
Hmm.
one meal at a time, one day at a time.
Yeah, because then you become obsessive about being mindful.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Let's not do that. Defeating the whole purpose.
Let's not do that. Oh, humans. We're so wonderful and messy.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so that's a really good tool that we can leave with everyone. And then the other one is decoding cravings. So, I mean, you can kind of combine these two tools, right? It's like you just, again, have to be mindful of what your cravings are And
Yeah,
then you start to decode them, right? Like whether they're physical or emotional, like once you know what they are, then you can try to decide maybe what your body is asking for from
for
that
sure.
craving.
And taking the shame out of it,
Yeah,
we're about loving our bodies, and that's a whole other topic. But just taking the shame out of it when we're looking at those cravings, like being maybe a little bit more practical, like factual about it. Like, this is a craving. It's not that I'm bad. It's not that I'm weak.
totally.
It's
Yeah,
okay.
that's true. There doesn't have to be any judgment on experiencing it. It's like, of course you're feeling that way. Yeah, absolutely. That's really great. Um, this is all we have time for, Laurel. I think we
Yes,
crammed
I
in a
know.
really good amount of stuff. And I want you just to, well, first of all, I want to thank you so much for doing this with me. I love chatting with you. And why don't
I
you
love
share
it
how
too.
people can find you if they want to get to talk to you as a nutritionist?
Yeah, for sure. So my website is internalbalance.ca.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm on Facebook and Instagram, internal_balanced on Instagram. And oh gosh, my Facebook.
It is
Raina,
internal balance, but you're also your
internal
name,
balance.
Laurel
Yeah,
Garner. Yeah, yeah,
Laurel
yeah.
Garner. Internal balance, Laurel Garner.
Internal balance is
Um,
such a great name.
Thank you.
It
Thank
really
you.
sums up your whole
Yeah,
jam.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I strive for. It's like it's not always there, but that's what I strive for, is that balance from the inside out.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time
Yeah.
today. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much, Raina.
Okay.
Mm.